When President Trump went on live television to insult Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's IQ, it wasn't a careless comment. It was a call out. But what followed wasn't just a quick-wit remark. It was groundbreaking. What Jasmine replied left the room speechless, igniting a national debate that resonates in classrooms around America today. This visit was not meant to be anything more than just another port of call on the administration's tour of Voices of America. A ceremony designed with one purpose only: to present a sense of unity, to hear concern from the community, and to make political capital in the crucial battleground areas. The script was supposed to go smoothly, but the situation was something else. The setting was Dayton, Ohio, within a high school gymnasium transformed into an ad hoc stage. The gym, with its subtle scent of new paint and worn-out bleachers, had become a politically minded host venue. The room was all dressed up in banners, tight security, and folded chairs placed strategically, all for a shining stage on which the presidential seal hovered center stage. Local politicians, national reporters, and congressmen had all convened for what was to be a live town hall forum, a nationally televised event on several networks. Citizens were assured that this would be an evening of unbridled discussion, a forum where ordinary people could ask their questions and express their concerns. But in reality, every second was being carefully choreographed. Producers spoke quietly into earpieces, aides distributed pre-approved talking points, and the press pool rustled uncomfortably. In the crowd sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, her sharp suit impeccable, her slicked hair perfect, red lipstick making herself impossible to ignore. There was a sense of defiance around her, with a hint of patience that was telling. Tonight was no ordinary night for her. The gravity of it wasn't because it was live or because the president was only 10 feet from her. It wasn't even because the cameras were on, recording every sentence for the entire country to witness. It was because she knew in her heart that tonight she wasn't speaking for herself. She wasn't there to give a political catchphrase for the media to analyze. She was there for those she served, the ones who had waited for someone to speak their truth. Her mailbox had overflowed with accounts of mothers living in apartment units destroyed by mold, teenagers making their way through schools with dysfunctional systems, and seniors who barely qualified to catch a bus to their doctor's appointments. It wasn't just random issues. It was one large systemic problem, and Jasmine was on a mission to ensure the world was made aware of it. Directly across from her, President Trump stood proudly, scanning his cue cards, his advisors at his flanks. He seemed at home, uncomfortable yet confident, nodding his head as an aide leaned in and spoke in his ear. Behind him, signs boasted proudly of the slogan, "Stronger communities, safer streets." It was not lost on any who had been watching that the irony of those words was to be made manifest in a manner no one could anticipate. The gym hummed with soft conversation as the crowd settled in. The moderators strode onto the stage and greeted the audience. The crowd applauded respectfully, but you could sense tension building with each passing second. And then the time came. Trump stepped up to the mic, greeted viewers, and delivered a brief speech that framed the nation in broad brushstrokes of economic prosperity and national pride. "We're listening tonight," he declared, "to the individuals who count, to the actual voices of this nation." The questions started out as softballs. Small business owners, local sheriffs, and a Republican state senator who thanked the president for keeping us safe and putting America first. But when the moderator called her name, the atmosphere in the room changed. A few heads turned, some snickered, while others leaned forward, knowing something unique was about to happen. Jasmine stood slowly, not in a rush to prove anything, but in a way that seemed deliberate. She adjusted the mic, smiled briefly, and started to speak. "Good evening, Mr. President. I'm Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, representing parts of South Dallas and Fort Worth. And I'm here because my constituents haven't seen the benefits of your policies. They've seen their grocery prices go up, but their paychecks stay the same. Their schools age, but their textbooks never age." The room fell silent. Her voice was tranquil and measured, but the authority behind it could not be denied. She was not reading from prepared notes. She was not reciting from a script. This was unfiltered, raw truth. A lifetime of listening to her constituents encapsulated in one uninterrupted sentence. She went on, "I want to ask you a question about your administration's cut to Title I schools. Schools that support low-income communities. You know what that does to the children in my district? They're learning math out of textbooks published when smartphones did not even exist. They're learning science in schools whose air conditioning doesn't work and where black mold proliferates. These aren't one-off issues. They are structural." The room at the gym shifted again, and this time it wasn't merely the crowd who could sense it. It was tangible, almost charged. Jasmine did not holler, did not point accusatory fingers, but each statement carried significance, and what followed was nothing short of a masterclass in challenging power. She stood upright, fingers loosely clasped in her lap, as though she were arguing with a family member at a barbecue. But this family member just so happened to be the head of the free world. She wasn't there to entertain. She was there to confront. Trump was surprised by the intensity of her words and nodded almost imperceptibly. He hadn't been ready for her to fire back like that. He stared at her for a beat, trying to remember where he had seen her. But instead of the witty repartee he had been expecting, he was faced with something much more difficult. A woman who wouldn't hesitate to tell it like it is. The moderator cut in, asking Jasmine to clarify what she meant by systemic. Jasmine didn't hesitate. "Sure," she replied, her Texas drawl strong but steady. "Let me paint the picture. You've got classrooms where the ceiling leaks when it rains, but we're told there's no budget for repairs. Students who share torn-up textbooks because there aren't enough copies. Teachers working 2 jobs and still buying their own supplies. And at the same time, the same government that says it loves American children continues to cut its education budget as if it were loose change." The camera closed in not on Trump, but on her. And for a moment, it seemed as though the world waited with bated breath for what she would say next. "Tell me how that is not systemic neglect," she said, her words dropping with the impact of a precision-guided missile, leaving the crowd in stunned silence. The whispers began, spreading through the audience, swelling. A couple of seconds, and then there was applause. At first hesitant, gradually increasing. It filled the gym, bouncing off the walls. Some even rose to their feet. Trump's face hardened. He did not like not being the one with the last word. He leaned in and tilted his head, attempting to take back control. "So tell me," he said with a pause for emphasis, "where did you learn English?" That's when the mood in the room shifted. The tension thickened, became suffocating. The moderator halted, unsure of what to do. Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she replied slowly, deliberately, "In Texas public schools, Mr. President, the same ones your policies continue to shortchange." The room was quiet for an instant, and then the applause resumed, stronger, louder. It was not a polite round of applause. It was the roar of a nation waking up to something more profound, something true. Jasmine scrolled through her phone, her eyes scanning the messages that rolled in. One message from her sister was jarring. "Ma's crying. You sounded like Pop when he used to argue on the porch." Another from an old college roommate. "Girl, you just made history." The words ran an electric current through her. But the biggest surprise was when her comms director, Riley, walked into the room carrying a laptop. She didn't say a word, just turned the screen towards Jasmine. The video was already captioned in several languages, and the web was abuzz. Footage from years past was being shared, vintage speeches, committee hearings, all fitting together a fresh narrative. "She's been telling y'all." And beneath it all, the same moment repeatedly. "In public schools in Texas, Mr. President, the same ones your policies keep underfunding. No screaming, no tantrums, just accuracy." Her statements struck with the power of a perfectly shot arrow, and the phones on the corridor didn't ring until they stopped ringing. Someone knocked on the door every 10 seconds. MSNBC, NPR, even conservative channels. Everyone needed her on. But Jasmine didn't agree to go on anyone's show, not yet. She wasn't in a hurry. She turned to Riley instead, a small smile playing on her lips. "What's the tone out there? Half of the internet wants you to be president." Riley said. The other half is trying to spin your words around. But your people, they're proud. Really proud. Jasmine rose to her feet, buttoning her blazer deliberately. I did what I came to do. Riley paused for a beat, then asked, You sure you don't want to get in front of the backlash? Jasmine tossed back, What backlash? I told the truth. Let them spin it. Let them lie. I've got my receipts. Outside, a small group of supporters had already gathered. Some held handwritten signs. One of them, a middle-aged school nurse named Tanya from Akron, proudly held a poster that read, This is what a representative looks like. A young man next to her live-streamed the crowd, his voice thick with emotion as he told his viewers, This is the first time I felt seen by someone in office. It wasn't about taking down Trump. Jasmine wasn't merely challenging the president. She was challenging years of systems that had disregarded her people. She had done this before, just not on national television, to teachers who disbelieved her, to bosses who spoke over her, to politicians who smiled tightly and patronized behind closed doors. She had always spoken loudly, quietly, and been told she was too hostile, too pointed, or not smooth enough. But tonight, those same attributes became hers. But with power came a tempest she'd never encountered. Not to this magnitude. By midnight, Jasmine Crockett's name was on headlines across the planet. Texas Congresswoman shuts down Trump with grace, read The Guardian. Mic drop moment in Dayton Town Hall, said Politico. Even global news channels from Toronto to Berlin to Lagos were looping the clip like sports highlights. In her hotel room, the Crown Plaza just off Edwin C. Moses Boulevard, Jasmine sat on the edge of the bed, shoes off, hair loosened. The remote control was untouched. She didn't need to turn on the news to know the moment had ignited. Her chief of staff, Dion, stood by the window, phone to her ear, legal pad in her hand. She's not taking interviews until noon, Dion said into the phone. We'll send a statement in the morning. No, she's not doing Tucker. Come on now, Jasmine said, opening a bottle of ginger ale. Her eyes settled on her locked phone, which vibrated again. Someone had posted her in another thread. It was not just a comeback. It was a message. Jasmine did eventually say something, ending the silence. How bad is it on the other side? Dion faced him, expression serious. Fox is already trying to spin it as a setup ambush. Breitbart labeled you combative. But the truth? Teachers' unions are supporting you. Civil rights organizations are contacting you. Even some old Republicans are claiming you exercised restraint. Jasmine released a soft laugh. Restraint? That's what they mean when a black woman doesn't smack the mic out of his hand. Dion smiled weakly, still holding her phone to her ear. I'll send you the talking points draft by text. As Dion emerged, Jasmine remained quietly in the background, eventually turning on the television. CNN had a split screen, her on one half, Trump on the other. The anchor was dissecting the exchange word for word, almost as if conducting a cross-examination in a courtroom. Jasmine didn't have to listen. She saw it in their eyes, the analysts who typically waffled their opinions now clearly shocked. A Republican strategist conceded. Crockett behaved herself with dignity. A Democratic commentator shook his head and said, We needed this moment. We needed to have someone like her display how it's done. But not everyone was applauding. On Twitter, trolls and bots were going full force. Old college pictures of Jasmine being posted out of context. Her voting history being dissected. Conspiracy accounts floated around. Memes attempting to make her something she was not. Jasmine took a deep breath and powered off her phone. She knew the game. They were attempting to discredit her before the message had a chance to register. That's how it was. A black woman accesses her power, and suddenly the rules shift. Now she's polarizing. Now she's angry. Now she's threatening. But Jasmine was not angry. She felt transparent. At the same time, in Washington, Trump's entourage was strained. Leaks that emerged by morning showed the president had blown up backstage, blaming his staff for allowing Crocker to speak without screening her, and accusing aides of allowing him to be set up. He apparently insisted on a list of all her questions ever asked in committee hearings. Find something, he said. There's always something. Cable news devoured it. On Morning Run, a vetted Republican senator declared, "If she got under his skin that quickly, think about what a whole debate would be like." Meanwhile, Howard Crocker 2028 began trending. Not because Jasmine had made any kind of announcement, but because people noticed something they don't often see. A woman who wouldn't fold. A woman who wouldn't scream. A woman who wouldn't play the script. Dion returned to the room, eyes open wide. "You have to see this." She extended her phone. It was a text message from a New Jersey high school senior. "I saw what you did, and I bawled. I never have seen someone like me speak truth with that kind of equanimity. I'm going into politics now. Just thought you should know that." Jasmine read it twice. "Save it," she said, a quiet resolve in her voice. "We're going to need that." But what people hadn't seen, the part they didn't know about, was what built her for this moment. Why her answer didn't come from a script, came from a lifetime. The next morning, after the town hall, while reporters wondered if Jasmine Crockett's moment would pivot the 2028 discussion, she was in the bathroom of her hotel, brushing teeth, looking into the mirror, not practicing, simply recalling. The scent of chalk, the hum of the overhead fan above her third-grade classroom. Her teacher, Miss Olmsted, who never changed her beige cardigan and called on Jasmine when no one else's hand went up. That was Tyler, Texas, her hometown, her first stage. Her father, a pipe fitter who returned home covered in sweat and fiberglass. He never graduated high school, but he did teach her two things. Don't let anyone tell you how much you're worth, and don't speak simply to speak. Make it mean something. In high school, Jasmine joined the debate team, not because she loved arguing, but because she wanted to figure out how power worked. Her first topic was prison reform. She stayed up until 2 a.m., digging through stats and case studies. When she presented her case to a room full of bored judges and half-awake teens in a small auditorium, one of them sat up and said, "That girl's got something." Her coach took her aside later and told her, "You're dangerous when you slow down. Don't rush. Let your words land." She never forgot it. After graduation, she attended Prairie View A&M, where she witnessed firsthand what underfunded state universities were like. Leaky ceilings, broken desks, sometimes no Wi-Fi, but loads of brilliance in the classrooms. That's where she honed her voice. Not to argue, but to plead. One day, when she was a sophomore, she did a speech on the dearth of mental health services. It wasn't videotaped. Reporters didn't attend, but individuals remembered it. A janitor intercepted her after and said, "You keep sounding like that, baby, and they're going to put you in Congress or attempt to quiet you." Both occurred. It was starting to resemble a new type of politics, one that was not based on yelling and performative fury but something more solid, something no one had witnessed in quite some time. The type of politics that was not just about the person with the loudest voice in the room, but about subtle, piercing truths uttered in the appropriate moments. Nevertheless, the president's supporters' attacks intensified. A marginal blog uncovered old video of Jasmine at a campus protest, falsely accusing her of having ties to extremist groups. There were rumors that she had a ghostwriter for her speeches. None of it took hold. The din went on unrelenting. One morning, Dion took Jasmine to see a tweet from a sitting senator. "We don't need another media darling in Congress. We need serious people doing serious work." Jasmine rolled her eyes. "I've passed more bills this year than he's shown up to vote for." But it wasn't all din. The next day, she had a voicemail from Republican Senator Lowell Burks of Ohio, who is rarely known to break ranks. He gave no number but only a message. "We may not see eye to eye on much, Congresswoman, but the way you behaved the other night, that's leadership. We could use some more of that in Washington." Jasmine heard it once. It wasn't simply a compliment. It was affirmation that her approach, her speaking style, was already altering the conversation. That evening, she sat down with a handful of teachers at a Dayton community center. No headlines, no cameras. Just a fold-up table, 10 teachers, and conversation about textbooks, malfunctioning HVAC systems, and lunch programs not enough. Among them was Mrs. Francine, a science teacher who retired some years back, with a creaky voice and thick-rimmed glasses. She took Jasmine's hand as she departed. "You didn't answer back that man for yourself," said Mrs. Francine. You answered for all of us who never were given the mic. Jasmine stopped, weighing the force of the words. No, she said softly. I answered for the children who still don't have one. But she was beginning to understand it wasn't merely about answering. It was about initiating the next conversation on her own terms. By day 3, the news stories had changed. It wasn't what had occurred. It was what it meant. Jasmine Crockett's name wasn't trending on social media. It was appearing in op-eds, on TV shows, in classrooms. Social media was a mosaic of responses. Teachers posted photographs of dilapidated chairs, chipped walls, and overflowing classrooms. Parents shared their stories about struggling schools, and students marked Jasmine in videos, saying, "We get it now. Thank you." In Toledo, Ohio, a class of 7th grade English students utilized her quotation as a prompt for writing. The teacher wrote it large on the whiteboard in bold letters. In public schools in Texas, Mr. President, and asked students, "Where did you learn your voice?" They were all different. From my grandma yelling at the news, from Miss Langston in 6th grade, from watching someone finally say something on TV that made me feel smart, not small. Some of her teachers even printed out her speech and read it to their classes. It wasn't even that long, but it stuck because it was about more than politics. It was about being seen, about being spoken to rather than spoken over. Individuals who'd never previously heard of Jasmine Crockett before the town hall were now paraphrasing her, as if she'd been living among them for decades. News anchors referred to her as a voice of sense. Civil rights leaders likened her calm to that of icons such as Barbara Jordan and Shirley Chisholm. An op-ed piece in the Detroit Free Press stated, Jasmine Crockett did more than respond to a disrespectful question. She reminded a generation that your roots do not make you small. They make you strong. In the White House, the president continued to be combative. During a press conference in Springfield, Missouri, a reporter queried him whether he regretted what he had said. He dismissed it. I said what I said. She took it too personally. It's political theater, folks. But by this point, it didn't matter how he explained it. The moment had gotten away from him and had grown larger.
Local school boards in such cities as Wichita, Kansas, and Erie, Pennsylvania, began adopting resolutions, using the exchange as an argument to encourage new funding. Educators started invoking her words in grant proposals. Even one school district in Indiana began a campaign entitled Teach with Dignity, specifically using the national debate her remarks had started. Jasmine's employees had to call in volunteers simply to assist with answering the deluge of mail. There were some angry letters, but overwhelmingly they were full of thanks. One such letter, written in a pen, was from a retired principal in Shreveport, Louisiana. I've worked 32 years in public schools, and I've never heard anyone say something as much truth as that in such a short sentence. Thank you for making us visible in our own district. Meanwhile, back in Texas, Respect Public Schools rally was organized by the students. Hundreds came dressed in shirts that bore the message, I speak public. The crowd hushed when Jasmine came on screen through a video call to thank them. She didn't deliver a speech. She simply smiled and said, "This isn't my moment. It's yours. Keep speaking up, even when they don't like it." Her team began to refer to it as the shift, because it wasn't political. It was cultural, emotional. A collective breath out. Folks who had spent decades swallowing small humiliations, patronizing glances, passive jabs, underfunded horizons, felt, if only for an instant, like they weren't alone in it. At a Lexington, Nebraska, coffee shop, an older pair were sitting outside when they heard a group of teenagers inside discussing her. The woman leaned over and said, "Y'all talking about that Congresswoman?" One of the girls spoke up, saying, "Yes, ma'am." She never blinked. "Not at all." The woman smiled. That's the sort of silent fury we're looking for. While at Jasmine's district office in the meantime, they converted their little foyer into a message board. Individuals sent in post-it notes, napkins, and notebook paper with such messages as, "I learned English in Mississippi barefoot, reading church bulletins. I received my education under flickering lights, but I still graduated top of my class. Tell the president I speak 3 languages, and one of them is dignity." But as the sound increased, Jasmine understood that something else had to come next. A message is only as powerful as the movement that goes behind it. By the end of the week, It wasn't Trump anymore. What had begun as a acerbic exchange between a congresswoman and a sitting president had evolved into something more substantial, something more profound than sound bites. The discussion had shifted into living rooms, community centers, faculty lounges, and barbershops throughout the nation. On Flint's Real Talk Radio, a top-rated segment began with this straightforward question: when were you first talked down to for speaking the way you do? The phone lines rang off the hook. One caller, Earl, who was a retired mechanic, explained how a boss had told him to have someone else write up the reports because his grammar was tough. Another caller, a Latina nurse from Albuquerque, recalled that her high school counselor informed her that she should put more effort into beauty school than college. Next, a grandmother from Mobile, Alabama, replied, "That man asked me where I learned English. Baby, I taught English to my entire family with a GED and 3 jobs. I bet she learned it from women like me." It wasn't so much about defending Jasmine anymore. It was about introspection. Individuals were recalling the words that stuck and those that attempted to minimize them. Even legislators who had originally stayed far away from Jasmine started to reassess their strategy. Representative Theo Nash of Cincinnati, who infrequently spoke on topics beyond his committee, tweeted, "We don't have to agree on policy all the time, but I admire a person who speaks with such consistency. Public schools built America. Let's pay for them like it." In classrooms, students started writing essays and oral pieces influenced by the moment. An 8th grader in Springfield, Oregon, read at a local council meeting a piece ending with, "My grammar isn't broken. Your understanding is." At the same time, Crockett's office collaborated with teachers to initiate a new online initiative, #WhereWeLearned. It wasn't polished, no commercial advertising, only genuine, unvarnished accounts from ordinary folks, where they learned to read, speak, and lead, and at what price. One of the posts read, "I studied English under a tin roof in Laredo, on a milk crate while my grandma translated soap operas to teach me words." Another read, "I learned how to fight in a cafeteria with 6 cousins and 1 piece of pizza. My first podium was a kitchen table." Celebrities chimed in. Actors, writers, even some athletes shared childhood photos from public schools with the caption, "This is where I learned." But Jasmine said nothing about them. Stayed local, ground level. She went to schools in her district. Quiet visits. No media. Just time spent listening. One of the teachers, Miss Riggins, pulled her aside following a tour of the classroom and said, "I've been teaching for 22 years. Nobody's ever asked me what I need without a camera in the room." Jasmine simply said, "Tell me everything," and listened. While that, however, was happening, political strategists were arguing about whether this movement could be made into a platform. Jasmine was avoiding the question. "I didn't come here to run for higher office," she told an interview on PBS. "I came to serve the people who sent me. And right now, that means making sure every kid in this country has a classroom worth learning in." But not everyone believed her. Speculation spread. Crockett 2028. Future Speaker. Was this the rise of a new voice in the party? Her team kept their heads down. Dion, in a rare unfiltered moment, told a reporter, "You can keep chasing the narrative. We're chasing change." Behind the scenes, there were meetings going on. Jasmine had started writing a new legislative proposal on federal education equity, not only funding, but accountability. She was rounding up a bipartisan list of legislators who would sign on to be quoted. Some cautioned her, "This will make enemies." Others told her, "Don't squander your political capital too early." But Jasmine didn't care. "This capital isn't mine," she told Dion. "It belongs to every kid who's ever been told to stay quiet. I'm just borrowing it." But if there was one thing she knew for sure, it was that moments fade, but movements grow roots. It's one thing to speak up, it's another to live in the echo of your own voice, day after day, with people listening who never had the chance before. For Jasmine, this wasn't just a fleeting moment, it was a daily reality. And it was becoming a new kind of politics, one grounded not in performative anger but in genuine action and leadership. Meanwhile, back in Washington, things had also changed. Jasmine's Fair Classrooms Act had gained unprecedented traction. A handful of centrist Republicans, astonishing their base, co-signed sections of the bill. Jasmine didn't see all of what she wanted in the initial draft, But that wasn't the point. The point was movement. Progress. It was the start of something beyond herself, something much more difficult to ignore. At a committee hearing, one of the older senators leaned into his mic and stated, "I didn't like how she arrived, but I can't say she's not here for the right reasons." That clip went around too. Not because it was sensational, but because it was uncharacteristic. The kind of uncharacteristic honesty that pierced the chatter and the constant party line fighting. And for Jasmine, that was good enough. While this was going on, the president himself had transitioned to another scandal. Some issue of tariffs and trade. His media backers had all but abandoned the Crockett story. That chapter was over for them. But for ordinary folks, it remained wide open. In communities where schoolyards were overgrown with weeds higher than the children, where substitute teachers came through like bus routes, where students prepped for standardized tests on dusty laptops, Jasmine's words hadn't merely encouraged, she had legitimized. Her message of reality still persisted. One day, Jasmine got a small package from a school in Roanoke, Virginia. In it was a scrapbook and letters, drawings, and a hand-drawn certificate that said, "For speaking truth in a room that wasn't built to hear it." She did not cry. She didn't have to. She simply ran her hand over the paper and sat very still for a very long time, the burden of it settling into her chest. After that, Dion opened the door in the middle of the meeting and stated, "They want to award you at that DC gala." Jasmine didn't glance up. Which one? The one with all of the cameras. Jasmine missed a beat. "Tell them I'm giving a speech at a PTA meeting tonight." Seriously. Dead serious. She did mean it. Not because awards were insignificant, she knew they weren't, but because the individuals in that PTA meeting never had a congresswoman come and inquire as to what chairs their children sat in. She wasn't there for the cameras, the applause, or the interviews. She was there for the children whose futures hung on every minor choice made at the local level. And over time, the moment would pass from the headlines, but in library books, schoolrooms, and community centers throughout the land, it would live on. It lived on in lines printed on posters, in lesson plans, in the way a child raised his hand a little higher because someone who sounded like him spoke up without shame. Jasmine continued to do the work. Town halls, policy drafts, long meetings, short breaths. She understood that she'd be tested once more. Misquoted. Challenged. But she understood she could bear it. Because that evening in Dayton wasn't about owning anyone. It was about reclaiming something. Dignity. Presence. Evidence that grace under pressure is still power. As the years went by, long after Trump had left office, that 17-second video continued to be circulated. Not for what he'd said, but for what she'd responded. Plain. Concise. Unwavering. In Texas public schools, Mr. President, the very same ones your policies continue to underfund. It wasn't merely a clapback. It was a reminder. A statement. A legacy. So, if this story touched you, if you felt yourself or someone you love in those words, then don't just sit back. Speak. Ask questions. Show up. Because moments don't change the world. People do. If Jasmine's story touched your heart, if you're ready to join a movement that believes in the power of speaking truth and demanding change, then don't simply watch. Join us. Click that subscribe button and be among the first to see powerful stories, authentic conversations, and moments that force us to think differently. This is not about politics. It's about your voice, your power, and the change you wish to see. Subscribe now and let's make our voices heard.